Can't you sleep, little bear? The lion who lost his roar but learnt to draw, and rainbow magic.
Hi kids, welcome back to another story time. First up, we have Can't You Sleep, Little Bear? Once there were two bears, Big Bear and Little Bear. Big Bear is the big bear and Little Bear is the little bear. They played all day in the bright sunlight. When night came, the sun went down. Big Bear took Little Bear home to the bear cave. Big Bear put Little Bear to bed in the dark part of the cave. "Go to sleep, Little Bear," he said, and Little Bear tried. Big Bear settled in the big chair and read his bear book by the light of the fire. But Little Bear couldn't get to sleep. "Can't you sleep, Little Bear?" asked Big Bear, putting down his bear book, which was just getting to the interesting part, and paddling over to the bed. "I'm scared," said Little Bear. "Why are you scared, Little Bear?" asked Big Bear. "I don't like the dark," said Little Bear. "What dark?" said Big Bear. "The dark all around us," said Little Bear. Big Bear looked, and he saw the dark part of the cave was very dark. So he went to the lantern cupboard and took out the tiniest lantern that was there. Big Bear lit the tiniest lantern and put it near to Little Bear's bed. "There's a tiny light to stop you being scared, Little Bear," said Big Bear. "Thank you, Big Bear," said Little Bear, cuddling up in the glow. "Now, go to sleep, Little Bear," said Big Bear, and he padded back to the bear chair and settled down to read the bear book by the light of the fire. Little Bear tried to go to sleep, but he couldn't. "Can't you sleep, Little Bear?" yawned Big Bear, putting down his bear book with just 4 pages to go to the interesting bit, and paddling over to the bed. "I'm scared," said Little Bear. "Why are you scared, Little Bear?" asked Big Bear. "I don't like the dark," said Little Bear. "What dark?" asked Big Bear. "The dark all around us," said Little Bear. "But I brought you a lantern," said Big Bear. "Only a teeny weeny one," said Little Bear, "and there's lots of dark." Big Bear looked, and he saw that Little Bear was quite right. There was still lots of dark. So Big Bear went to the lantern cupboard and took out a bigger lantern. Big Bear lit the lantern and put it beside the other one. "Now, go to sleep, Little Bear," said Big Bear, and he padded back to the bear chair and settled down to read the bear book by the light of the fire. Little Bear tried and tried to go to sleep, but he couldn't. "Can't you sleep, Little Bear?" grunted Big Bear, putting down his book with just 3 pages to go, and paddling over to the bed. "I'm scared," said Little Bear. "Why are you scared, Little Bear?" asked Big Bear. I don't like the dark, said Little Bear. What dark? asked Big Bear. The dark all around us, said Little Bear. But I brought you 2 lanterns, said Big Bear. A tiny one and a bigger one. Not much bigger, said Little Bear. And there's still lots of dark. Big Bear thought about it, and then he went to the lantern cupboard and took out the biggest lantern of them all. With 2 handles and a bit of chain, he hooked the lantern up above Little Bear's bed. I've brought you the biggest lantern of them all, he told Little Bear. That's to stop you being scared. Thank you, Big Bear, said Little Bear, curling up in the glow and watching the shadows dance. Now go to sleep, Little Bear, said Big Bear, and he padded back to the bear chair and settled down to read the bear book by the light of the fire. Little Bear tried and tried and tried to go to sleep, but he couldn't. Can't you sleep, Little Bear? groaned Big Bear, putting down his bear book with just 2 pages to go and paddling over to the bed. I'm scared, said Little Bear. Why are you scared, Little Bear? asked Big Bear. I don't like the dark, said Little Bear. What dark? asked Big Bear. The dark all around us, said Little Bear. But I brought you the biggest lantern of them all, and there isn't any dark left, said Big Bear. Yes, there is, said Little Bear. There is, out there, and he pointed out of the bear cave at the night. Big Bear saw that Little Bear was right. Big Bear was very puzzled. All the lanterns in the world couldn't light up the dark outside. Big Bear thought about it for a long time, and then he said, Come on, Little Bear. Where are we going? asked Little Bear. Out, said Big Bear. Out into the darkness? said Little Bear. Yes, said Big Bear. But I'm scared of the dark, said Little Bear. No need to be, said Big Bear, and he took Little Bear by the paw and led him out from the cave into the night. And it was dark. Ooh, I'm scared, said Little Bear, cuddling up to Big Bear. Big Bear lifted Little Bear and cuddled him and said, Look at the dark, Little Bear. And Little Bear looked. I've brought you the moon, Little Bear, said Big Bear. The bright yellow moon and all the twinkly stars. But Little Bear didn't say anything, for he had gone to sleep, warm and safe in Big Bear's arms. Big Bear carried Little Bear back into the cave. Fast asleep, he settled down with Little Bear in one arm and the bear book on the other, cosy in the bear chair by the fire. And Big Bear read the bear book right to the end. Next we have the lion who lost his roar but learnt to draw. Roar! Lionel loved to roar. He had a deafening voice. It startled butterflies and birds and scattered herds of animals. Please, can you try to be a little quieter, Lionel? Asked Papa. You've disturbed the birds, flustered the butterflies, and the zebras are hiding again. Roar! You're going to give me a headache, said Mama. Why don't you sit quietly and draw? Drawing is boring. I like roaring. So Lionel did just that, all day long. Lionel's roar drowned out the whoosh of the waterfall. He shocked a flock of flamingos. He alarmed the aardvarks. He panicked the parrots. Next morning, Lionel tiptoed to Mama and Papa's bed. He opened his mouth, but nothing happened. His roar was no more. Oh dear, Mama said. All that roaring has made your throat sore. Lionel was thirsty. He pointed to his mouth. I don't know what you mean, said Papa. Lionel went to the lake for a drink. The flock of flamingos squawked at him, but Lionel couldn't speak. The parrots on their perches said "Quack," but Lionel couldn't reply. The monkeys chattered, but Lionel was silent. The elephants trumpeted, but Lionel could only sigh. Look, Lionel, said Monkey, you've drawn a pattern. It's a curly swirl, just like my tail. Drawn, thought Lionel, but drawing's boring. Pretty pattern, squawked the parrots. Lionel had to agree, the pattern did look rather good. Can you draw me? Asked Flamingo. And me, added Monkey. Lionel could only nod. He bounded home, and the other animals followed him. He chose a pink crayon and started to scribble. When Lionel handed over his drawing, Flamingo was so happy. Thank you, Lionel. It looks just like me. Drawing was fun. The different coloured crayons matched the different things around him. Bright blue clouds, pretty pink flamingo, yummy yellow bananas, glossy green leaves. How lovely, said Mama. You do like drawing after all. No, Lionel croaked. His voice was coming back. I like drawing. And the last story I've got is from the Fairy Collections. It's called Rainbow Magic. Once upon a time, there was an old lady called Gran Tibbet. She lived in a farmhouse on the edge of the forest with her grandmother Annie and little dog Bozo. Around the house was a pretty rose garden, and around the garden was a grassy meadow that went right to the edge of the dark fern forest. Early in the morning, the deer and their fawns would come out of the forest and eat the grass in the meadow. Sometimes Annie could get quite close to a fawn, but little dog Bozo would run out and bark at the big deer. One day they won't run away, Annie scolded. Then you'll be sorry. But little dog Bozo only laughed. When the weather turned cold, Gran Tibbet's knee joints stiffened and her elbows creaked, and everything would ache. Everything that could ache began to ache. She would sigh and sadly say to Annie and little dog Bozo, "I'm getting old, and I'm good and ready for my heavenly reward. But who will look after you when I'm gone?" But Annie and little dog Bozo were not really worried, because they felt sure Gran would go on being Gran forever. They built houses of dried fern fronds and made leaf boats and sailed them on the water. A big fish lived in the pool, and if they kept very still, he rose to look at them. But Bozo always barked. With a splash, the fish would be gone. On showery days, Annie sometimes saw a rainbow, so close she called to Gran, "Shall I run to see if I can find the fairies, or to gold at the end of the rainbow?" But Gran said, "You keep away from rainbows, Annie. They are very funny things. You can get caught under rainbows and never come home again." One day, when Annie and little dog Bozo were playing in the forest, it began to rain. They crept into a hollow tree. Soon the sun shone again, and suddenly a big, beautiful rainbow came curving out of the sky and touched the mossy ground in front of them. Just inside the rainbow was a pot filled with gold. "Oh," Annie cried, "what a lovely present to take Gran." She forgot all about Gran's warning and ran towards the pot. But as she and little dog Bozo went under the rainbow, something strange happened. They started to shrink and become smaller and smaller until they turned into 2 little fairy folk. They each now had wings and were so small that the grass blades were as tall to them as trees. "Oh, Bozo," cried Annie, "how will we find our way home to Gran to tell her what has happened to us?" She sat down under a toadstool and began to cry. Bozo tried out his wings, but landed head over paws in a clump of violets. Annie couldn't help laughing. "We'll have to walk until we learn to fly," she said. "Come on, let's go home." After a while they came to a deep river. "How will she get across?" whispered Annie to Bozo. Just then a frog came out from his moss-covered house and offered to ferry them across the water. "What a nice boat," Annie said as she climbed in it. "It reminds me of something. Why, I do believe it's one of the boats we made when we were playing here." When they reached the other bank, Annie thanked the frog and gave him a biscuit from her lunch bag. The sun went down and the forest filled with shadows. Annie and little dog Bozo began to feel frightened. Suddenly, a family of mice came scurrying along the path, scaring Bozo. But the mice were friendly and warned the two new fairy folk that the big wild cat was out hunting. "Hurry, he's coming," they said. "Follow us." So Annie and little dog Bozo went home with the mice for supper. They had grasshopper pie and toasted midges, and Annie broke up some biscuits to give to the baby mice. Then they all went to sleep, tucked up, small and warm in a soft bed of thistledown. When the moon rose, the mice ran out to dance in the moonlight, but Annie and little dog Bozo did not wake till sunrise. The next morning, Annie and Bozo said goodbye to the mice and set off on their long walk home. After a while, they rested with some friendly bluebirds they met on their way. They ate moth cakes and ant cookies and drank tea out of flower cups. Then they all sat on a wild rose branch and sang some songs until it was time for them to set off once more on their journey home. The next day they met a wise old Mr. Longlegs, who knew almost everything about everything. After they had told him their story, he looked at them thoughtfully for a while, then said, "I think you had better meet the Fairy King and Queen and all the other fairy folk. Little folk just like yourselves live in the fairy glade by the waterfall just down the path." Annie and little dog Bozo felt so happy to know there were other little people just like themselves. They thanked Mr. Longlegs and ran towards the waterfall, which sparkled between the trees. But suddenly that wicked wild cat pounced on little dog Bozo and was about to eat him when... "Stop that at once," a voice commanded. "Put down that fairy person." It was the Fairy King. The cat sulkily put down little dog Bozo and slunk away. Then the Fairy King led them to the fairy court, where they met the Fairy Queen. In the fairy glade they gathered all those who had gone under the rainbows at one time or another. The king explained that because Annie and Bozo had not listened to Grand Tibbet's warning, they would now be fairy folk forever and ever. They must learn to be good fairy folk, just like the others. Then all the fairies, elves and pixies came forward to greet them. So Annie and little dog Bozo lived happily with the fairies, but they longed to see Gran again. One day they asked the king and queen if they could visit her, and soon all the court were winging their way through the fern forest till they came to Gran Tibbet's old house. Gran was sitting in the twilight, feeling very sad. She had given up all hope of ever seeing Annie and little dog Bozo again. Suddenly she looked up and saw a tiny little Annie and a weeny little dog Bozo alight upon her veranda rail. Behind them all the fairies fluttered down to picnic in her rose garden. "Look, Gran," cried Annie, "we're safe after all, but we have to be fairy folk forever and ever. We're well and happy, and we've brought a present for you, the pot of gold we found under the rainbow." So Annie and little dog Bozo lived with the fairy folk forever, but they often came to talk to Gran while the fairy court picnicked in her rose garden. Gran stopped worrying about who would take care of Annie and little dog Bozo, because she knew that now they could look after themselves. And what about that pot of gold? Of course, it was only a fairy-sized pot of gold, so Gran set it on her mantelpiece in a tiny glass case, just to prove that fairy folk really did live in the fern forest, and that there really was a pot of gold to be found under the rainbow. Well, I hope you enjoyed those stories, kids. Please come back again. Have a good day.